Alrighty, I'm just gonna take my face off the screen here, otherwise I'll be looking at myself, which is really awkward. All right, welcome folks. Welcome to this webinar. Make sure you're muted so I don't hear phones going off. It's just as easy. My name is Mark. I've been with Uprise for a while. I'll talk to you a little bit about that very shortly. I haven't timed this presentation entirely, but we got asked to do a presentation on dealing with uncertainty, mindset and resilience, dealing with COVID-19 anxieties, coping mechanisms, potentially after organizational change or as changes happen in the workplace, and just general mental well-being and mental well-being tools. So I'll talk about that. I think I'll be going for about 40 minutes. I tend to, whether this is weakness or a strength, I don't know, but I tend to go fast and furious. So the recording will be there for you to potentially look back or listen back if there's anything you want to know more of. Feel free to take notes. Also feel free to potentially put questions in the chat box. If you got some questions, then we can always ask them or answer them later on after offline, and we can send answers to your organization. So we'll get going with that one, but yeah, excuse me for going fast and furious. I'm always trying to put as much information in here as I can. I know I'll be brain frying you a little bit, but it's all for good reasons. So hopefully you can see my presentation here, and we'll get cracking. Always, as always, like to acknowledge and pay my respects and honour the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and elders past, present and future. Acknowledge the stories, the traditions and the living cultures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this land. I'm on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. That's the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people who are still very active here and make their presence known for very good reasons, and definitely commit to building a brighter future together. Now, my name is Mark. Like I said to you before, I've been working with Uprise as a counsellor and a coach for, I think nearly 2 years now. Have been a counsellor in my own practice for about 17 years. Before that, my dark past, I was a barrister and solicitor in a different country in Europe. Did that for nearly 10 years and made the shift in mental health. So mental health for about 17 years at the moment. I really love my work for Uprise and mental health in general. And unfortunately, it's become a very hot topic, obviously, mental health. This was never meant to be my marketing strategy, I can tell you in all truth and honesty, but hey, the work is there, so we might as well go with it and catch it when we can. What I want to do, we'll talk about all the, post questions in the chat. That's easy. If you've got questions, post them in the chat. What I want to do, we'll talk about specific tips, actual really good tips to keep your resilience up and to deal with uncertain times that we're in. But what I think could be useful as well, and I've found that useful with clients, is to give you a bit of an idea of some neurobiology 101. And I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. But I think for us to understand what's going on in our brains, so to understand how we come to feel particular things and how come our thoughts are not always with us or not working for us. If we get an understanding of what actually takes place inside this noggin, then we can generally understand better why we are feeling a particular way, without blaming it on ourselves and thinking that there's something wrong with us. So I'll give that a couple of minutes, about 10 minutes, I'd say, to give you that idea of, okay, this is how the neurobiology in us actually works, which can explain a lot in terms of how we feel at this point in time and how we feel in general, really. So what we do in life and how we interpret life and how life happens to us, we deal with it through the same machine, if you want to call it. It's the same hardware and software. It's us and our brain. Understanding that hardware and software a little more can make a difference in our responses to that situation. So that's why I think it's good to know about that. And it also gives us understanding about why we sometimes react or respond in a way that we do before we actually know it's happening, and then potentially regret it later on or don't like it when it happens, but we can't seem to stop ourselves. So the idea is not to combat that per se, because that's a neurobiological process that just takes place in our head. What we can do though, and that's part of our job as mental health professionals, is learn to deal with it, learn to work with that, not to combat it, but to work with it. So not opposing our brain is a good thing. So let me get into this. So this slide of the triune brain, there's a little bit of research, a debate about whether this picture is still correct in terms of whether these three layers still exist. but there's plenty of researchers and scientists that still say, yeah, that this is pretty accurate still. So the way I see our brain and how it operates is kind of like a company. And there are three major parts in that company, or three major players in that company, if you will. The first part, it's the oldest part, it's about 300 million years old in terms of its development, is our reptilian brain, what I call the server room of the company. Beats our heart, breathes our lungs, keeps our temperature fairly steady, ideally controls our blood pressure, keeps all the essential stuff going. So the server room does its best. We don't need to muck around with the server room too much. It's doing its best as much as it can. And it hasn't got much involvement with our day-to-day activities. It just does all the behind-the-scenes stuff that's so vitally important to keep the company up. Now, the second part that roughly sits, if you want to get a location, behind your eyes, between your ears. That's a give or take location of that part of our brain. It's the limbic brain, or the mammalian brain. I call that part of our brain the security guard. Its job in our brain is to keep us safe from harm, to make sure we survive physically. It's also designed to increase comfort for us, so to not only fend off bad things, but to also make us go for things that could make us feel comfortable. So things like sleep, things like food, things like sex, things like belonging to a group, hanging out together, all those things, the creature comforts in life, they can make us feel safe. So therefore it prompts us to get more of those. Anything that could threaten that, like warring tribes, saber-toothed tigers, mammoths, threats, pack of wolves chasing you, those things need to either be fought off or run away from. So it's constantly scanning the environment through our senses, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our ears, our fingers, all our touch organs, to scan the environment for things that could threaten our safety or our physical survival. But it's also scanning the environment for things that could enhance our physical survival, that could make life more enjoyable. And that's, it's got access to all sorts of buttons and levers and all sorts of things that we consider emotions. So it talks to us through chemicals. And the well-known ones are dopamine, serotonin, the good feel hormones. There's a couple other ones, acetylcholine, and there's a couple other ones like those. And then what we call the bad feel hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. So it talks through us. It talks to us through physical sensations, through to sensations in our body, and it does that really well. So every time we feel something inside, like anxious, depressed, or whatever it is that we feel, or uncertain, that's a release of chemicals in our system that we interpret a particular way. But it also can make us feel excited, impassioned, or it can make us feel full of vibrancy or even infatuated, all that sort of stuff. So the good stuff sits there as well. So emotions is its language, and it does it really well. Now, because of its creation, because it's slightly older in terms of its development, about 200 million years old, it also has strong connections to our behavioral mechanism and to our mouth. So it can actually make us do stuff and say things or not say things in order to increase our survival or decrease our danger. So it often has first say in terms of what we're going to do. Now, on top of that, that sits right under your skull pretty much, along your whole skull line, is what I call the CEO. It's your neocortex, the youngest part, about 100 million years old in terms of development. That is the boss. So it's the boss of the company. Its role, the boss's role, is to plan our future, to look at medium to long-term plans to things that can make our life more effective, more profitable, if you want to talk in company terms, but to make sure that we do the right thing for us in the long term. So we'll lead a healthy, happy, and fulfilling life. So the two generally talk, and that's the whole idea. But evolutionarily speaking, there were always more dangers lurking in front of us than there were happy things. So our brains were actually always set up from a neurobiological point of view to be more focused on surviving than on thriving. That's just the way they've been set up. So about a 60-40, 55-45 division. There's more importance neurologically on surviving than there is on thriving. So our brains were always set up to fight off dangers and to go for things that make us more safe. So the security guard actually has quite an important role to play in our company. And it always thinks short term. So short-term survival is always good. So even if short-term actions might mean that we have long-term detrimental effects from that, From a survival point of view, that's still good. If I feel really anxious and a couple of glasses of wine make me feel better, then from a survival point of view, that's completely justified. The CEO might not agree with that all that much because tomorrow we'll feel horrible. And if we make this a habit, then there could be long-term ramifications for our health. But for the security guard, that's all good. Yeah, and that's why we often get prompted to do particular things that are not necessarily good in our long-term, but feel really good when we think about it. Even if it's in communication, some mouthing someone off generally feels good because at least we had a win. The fact that it was your boss and you might regret that later on in your performance review, whatever else, makes it tricky. But from a survival point of view, that's good. Fight it off. And if you can't fight it, run away from it. Don't worry about the long-term consequences. So physical survival was the big problem, obviously, for the cavemen or for the earlier versions of us. The problem for us is that most of our threats in our relatively comfortable 21st century society, most of our threats are mental or emotional. We feel threatened by situations, even though there is not necessarily a pack of wolves chasing us. We think that there is a pack of wolves chasing us, even though that pack of wolves is probably not there. But the fact that we're thinking that it is that way already makes us feel a particular way, because our survival brain doesn't see the difference between something that's actually happening or something that could be happening. So imagined or real life, that's a tricky one for that limbic brain behind your eyes, between your ears, to distinguish between. And that makes life really tough for many people, because most of our problems, sure, we can still be chased by deadly animals and stuff, and then our survival brain does a really good job. Well, we mostly think in terms of what ifs. What if this happens, or what if that doesn't happen, or if only I had. We look back and regret and all that sort of stuff. So we think a lot. Now, what do we do about that? Well, generally we don't like to think about stuff that we don't like. So we either fight it, we suppress it, we argue, we take charge, we bully the other person, or we bully ourselves, or we run away from it, which could mean running away from it in drink or in gambling or in other activities, completely ignoring the problem, sticking your fingers in your ears, closing your eyes, going la, 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 or numbing by whatever else is possible, Netflix, binging, eating, you mention it. And that in itself, that cycle of often fighting what's going on, fighting the feelings or fleeing the feelings, becomes a vicious cycle. And then the cycle starts to become a problem, because our brains are also smart enough to know that short-term strategies of putting your fingers in your ears, closing your eyes and going la, 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 la for what's going on in the world, strangely does make you feel better for about 5 minutes. So from a survival point of view, our security guard goes like, that's working, let's do more of that. Whereas the CEO then goes like, that's really not smart in terms of our long-term profitability or in terms of long-term survival of the company. But because of that shorter connections to our behavioral mechanism that our security guard brain has, we often keep doing the stuff that we know is not the smartest thing to do. But we often say that we can't seem to help ourselves. It just keeps happening. I've never met an addict, for instance, to take that example, who didn't want to quit. All addicts, no matter what you're addicted to, all addicts want to quit their addiction. They want to be addiction-free. Yet they keep going around that cycle. Why? Because, well, simply put, their survival brain, their security guard has taken over. It's running the show in terms of short-term gratification and short-term pain avoidance. So that's a big problem, obviously, but that goes outside what we're talking about here. But we get into this problem cycle where we're constantly bombarded with particular feelings of fright, uncertainty, anxiety, depression, stress, work overload, whatever it is. And we may know that there is something that we can do about that in the long term, but our security guard just keeps us making duck and weave movements in order to avoid the danger or to drown our sorrows and other things. And that's where it becomes really problematic. So what is so problematic about it? Well, the problem is that we assign value to words. So what we're thinking about, we translate, and this is a whole another webinar actually. What we value, we translate everything in words, in images, in stories, our life narrative. I was this, now I'm this. I used to like this about me, now I don't like it about me. So we translate our lives into stories. And the actual event, whatever happened previously, is not important anymore for our brains. The words or the stories we tell about that event become the most prominent thing. So if you hear the word performance review, there's a chance that immediately something inside you goes like, ooh. If you hear the word in-laws, then you might already go like, oh my gosh. If you hear the word COVID, then immediately it might elicit a reaction in you. If you hear the word vaccinations or pro-vaxxer or anti-vaxxer, that might immediately create a reaction in you, because the word in itself has taken on meaning. The word love and the word hate, there are just 4 letters in each word. They're just scribbles in space, really, but they have a different meaning to us. So they elicit a different response. Fingernails on a blackboard, if you try and imagine that, you might go, oh, cringe, that sounds awful. Bacon and onion ice cream, you might immediately know that that doesn't taste too great, even though I've just told you bacon and onion ice cream. I didn't mean anything with that, but you assign meaning to that. So thoughts, the words that we use to think about ourselves, can be true. They can definitely be true, or they can be false, but most of them are neither. They're just stories. They're stories, they're opinions, they're beliefs, they're ideas that we have, they're models of reality, they're predictions of the future, there's thoughts about the past. So they're just thoughts, they're just ideas that run through our head. And in psychology, in counseling, we talk about a term called cognitive fusion. What we do often is that we start to fuse the story with what we think is real. So the fusion, we fuse our own story in our own head with our mostly security guard brain interprets reality. If we have a particular idea about life, then we see that happen anywhere, everywhere, all the time. Maybe not, but there's a fair chance that we do. Why? Because we fused our ideas, our narrative about what life is all about and how dangerous, how wonderful something is, with how we perceive reality. And again, the CEO brain might still say, should put that under the microscope. Might not be entirely true, maybe some critical thinking is necessary here. But the security guard brain goes like, no, I don't need that. I'll just make you feel really anxious. I'll just make you feel really upset if you hear the word COVID, or if you hear the word pro-vax or anti-vaxxer, I'll just elicit a response in you. So the way I always explain this to clients, and then we pretty much will stop with the neurobiology stuff, is imagine you've got a really bad radio station in your head that constantly plays music, and some music you like, but most of the music you actually don't like at all. And it's constantly playing. It's not always playing when you fall asleep, but as soon as you wake up, it starts playing again. And most of the music you do not like. Some songs are pretty good, but most of the music you don't like. And we are just forced to listen to this radio station. This is awful. I'm not coping. I don't feel too great. Life is miserable. Our future is going to be awful. That type of music that it's constantly singing. So our brains are starting to think that, our thoughts are reality, and we start to live our lives that way. And that can cause all sorts of nasty problems, obviously. Now, the problem is not the negative thought per se. It's not the song that is playing per se. It's that we take that song so seriously, as if it was our life, as if it was the truth, as if it's so important to listen to that song, because obviously that song is true. So therefore, we need to do something about that. In psychology, and especially in a modality called acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, we always say thoughts are just thoughts. They are just ramblings. They're just random radio station songs that play in your head. They're not facts. Thoughts in themselves are not meaningful. We give a meaning. So a healthier way to approach our mind would be to not take things so seriously, not take our thoughts and the feelings that they elicit so seriously. Start putting them under the microscope. Actually distance yourself a little bit from those thoughts and say, hey, what am I thinking? What is this actually a realistic thought? Or is this some sort of thought based on an idea that I have that might be true? It might not be true, but most of it is neither. So another example I use with clients quite often is, have you ever had the experience, or is there, for instance, a particular type of food that you really enjoy, but the restaurant where you eat that food has horrible music playing in the background. Well, I do. I love anything Asian, and with all due respect for all Asian people, maybe amongst us listeners, I don't really like Asian music all that much. It's just not my type of music. But boy, do I like Asian food. So, am I willing to go into an Asian restaurant and suffer the music, if you will, but still will go there and suffer that music because the food is so good? If I do, I can learn to ignore that music and just enjoy my food and the company that I'm in and let the music be for what it is. That's the idea of something that we want to do with our own brains as well, to potentially step away from those thoughts. So how do you do that? Well, initially there's a couple of, there's 5 ways you can do that. That process is called diffusion. So fusion is thinking that thoughts are reality and we need to act on them because they feel a particular way. Diffusion says, well, let's separate those things. Feelings are one thing, thoughts are another thing. The truth is a whole other matter altogether. So initially, could we do a reality check? Is what's going on actually going on? Is this really taking place? Am I being chased by a pack of wolves? Is there something really coming for me? If so, do something. That's when your survival brain has it correct. Do something if you feel you are threatened right there and then, but make sure you apply the critical thinking to that and say, well, is this actually taking place? Is this happening right now? Is the house on fire, or do I have the thought that the house is on fire? Check real quick. So one of the ways you can do that is putting in front of every thought, especially the ones that you don't like, is putting in front of that, I'm having the thought that. So instead of saying, oh man, that was so bad, I'm such a loser, rather than saying that, is like, I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. Now, is that actually correct? Do the facts prove that? Have I got facts that actually tell me that I'm a loser, or am I just thinking that? Because we often think more than anything else. Feeling is another one. If you feel a particular way, you can be assured that was your security guard making you feel that way, because that's its job. And to just acknowledge that feeling, like, I am feeling uncertain. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling under the pump, even though that's not necessarily an emotion, but I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling overwhelmed. To acknowledge that, there's lots of neuroscientific research that says that when we acknowledge a feeling like that and sit with it for a bit, to just let that feeling be there without needing it to go away, the emotional intensity often drops. So just sitting with a feeling and acknowledging it. One of my heroes is a pediatric psychiatrist called Daniel Siegel. He calls it name it to tame it. If you can name the emotion, you're automatically taming it. So to say, look, stressful day, actually there's something going on. You've got a pile of work next to your desk. It's 4:30 p.m. and you're completely overwhelmed and absolutely exhausted. Okay, if that is what's going on, acknowledge that, like, I'm absolutely exhausted. I feel very overwhelmed. And to sit with that for a little bit, rather than trying to run away or to fight that, to actually acknowledge it, will make a massive difference in your resilience and your capability to cope with that. Thanks mind is another thing you can say. Once there's a story running in your head, you can actually say, okay, thanks mind, that's very informative. I'll think about that. As if your mind is that separate radio station running in your head, talking to you all day long. Sometimes, my mind comes up with the weirdest things, and I just shake my head and go, thanks mind, I'll take that into consideration, but I'll do a reality check on that first and see if it helps. Check, double check. That's another one. Make sure you check the reality of what it is that you're thinking. Ask yourself the question, is this what is going on right here, right now? Is what I'm feeling an accurate description of what is going on? If it's not an accurate description, it's probably a story. Most likely still okay to sit with that for a bit, to acknowledge that feeling, and then decide what it is that you're going to do next. Because deciding, that's a job that your CEO brain does. It sets the more medium to long-term approach. And the last one that I'll mention in here, in this webinar, is feel one thing and do another. And that's a funny one for many people. For instance, is it okay to feel really nervous and be afraid of public speaking and still publicly speak? Is it okay to fear for your job or to have job insecurity and potentially still open up to your manager about something that is not going right, for you? Is it okay to feel quite down and like you're having lack of energy and still going out for a jog, for a walk? So is it okay to feel one way and to do another thing rather than giving into the feeling? Because we're giving into the feeling, then we're giving into the security guard brain that just tries to keep us safe. But remember, it's only short term. So it generally might not be the best thing for you in the medium to long term. So feeling one way, doing another thing that's more effective is often the best way to go. Now, what to do? As I said, some thoughts are based around reality, so let's not ignore the fact that something is going on in Australia right now or globally. There is a pandemic that does affect us in many ways, shapes, or forms. So certain facts are definitely currently affecting our lives, and there's no way around that. And then practical stuff that you can do can definitely help. Sometimes you can take action. If you're for vaccinations, well, get your vaccines. If you're not really sure about vaccinations, for instance, well, do some other stuff that you think is useful. Up your vitamin C, up your vitamin D, whatever you think is useful, but do something based on an actual situation. So take some action. And the research suggests that not even in times like this with uncertainty, but in general, try and keep a routine, especially if you're now working from home. I don't know what you guys are doing, but if you find yourself working from home, keep the same routine up as if you were working in the office. Now, my partner has been working from home for close to a year and a half now, and she still commutes to work every morning because she goes for a 10-minute or 15-minute walk rather than a 20-minute drive. And she had to put that in her schedule because otherwise it didn't happen. So she leaves the house, she goes for a walk. I see her back in 15 minutes because I work from home as well. But she keeps up that routine as if that allows her to prepare for work. She keeps getting dressed, even though she doesn't have to because she works from home behind a computer, but she'll put on her uniform and make sure she looks the part as if she was going to work. Now, some people might say, that doesn't really work for me. But keep some sort of routine up that your brain interprets as safe. That seems to be the same as what I always do, because that helps. Staying active, that's another big one. Keep moving. Make sure you keep your body moving. There's loads of research that suggests that going for walks, going to the gym, doing some cardio exercise actually activates the strongest antidepressant in the world, and it's the one that sits inside us. So your endorphins. So by you remaining active to get your heart rate up every day for 20 to 30 minutes in whatever way, shape, or form you fancy is good. There's lots of YouTube and other apps out there you can put on your iPad or on your television screen where you can just dance along, hum along, dance, exercise along, do something to keep that exercise up and make sure you keep the blood flowing and the lymph flowing and good feelings flowing. And there's plenty of that. Reach Out has plenty of them. There's other ones that you can find as well. Chat with your mates. Ring, zoom, zoom. Ring people, connect with people, especially if you work from home and you're not doing water cooler chats anymore, or if you find yourself getting a bit lonely at home because you're just staring at Zoom, cameras and all that sort of stuff. Connect with people in whichever way you can. Ideally, it's face-to-face, but if that's not possible because of restrictions, check in with people on text or WhatsApp or Snapchat or whatever your favorite communicator is. Check in with people. Make sure you keep liaising with people and give them a phone call every now and then. It satisfies our crocodile brain, as I call it, our limbic old brain. It satisfies that because we connect with people. We're a herd animal. Never forget that. We are safe in groups. We feel safe in groups. That's just the way it is. And if we're locked up in our house, we don't feel safe existentially. It just doesn't feel safe. And that's part of that brain that's over 200 million years old. You can't avoid that. You can't fool it. Now make a homemade meal. Master Chefs Australia, make sure you keep eating and drinking right. So again, part of the routine, look after your veggies, whether you can get them yourself in the supermarket, where you let them be dropped off at your doorstep. Make sure you eat proper, good stuff, lots of fruits and veggies, and plenty of water, not too much coffee, please, not too much alcohol. Nothing wrong with all that, but just everything in moderation. But make sure you keep eating, lots of healthy stuff to keep your immune system up, but also to keep your good vibes up. It definitely has an influence on how we feel. Take a break from the news. Turn it off. Remember, words are symbols. the words pretty much symbolize our thoughts or symbolize what's going on. If you get bombarded day after day with case numbers, with deaths, with COVID, with coronavirus, with all those words, our poor old limbic brain can't help itself. It'll keep pumping out the chemicals that are associated with those words, because those words have taken on a particular meaning in our lives. So it keeps doing it. Now, you don't want to be an ignoramus. You don't want to be not informed about what's going on in the world, but potentially check twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, or the 6 o'clock news or whatever. Leave the rest alone. Just leave it. It's not necessary. By not exposing yourself to those words and to those images or mental images based on bad news or whatever's going on, you will slow that crocodile brain, that CEO brain, the security guard brain down, because you give it less chance to pump all these chemicals into your system that generally don't make you feel good. So turn off the news, turn up the music. Instead, do something that makes you feel good. Find a playlist on Spotify or Apple Music that actually generally gets you in the groove, and just put that in the background. Play some stuff that releases the good feel hormones. Generally, music, our thoughts, in a sense, they're symbols of something, lyrics of songs. Put some good songs on. They generally make us feel better, so we can stimulate that resilience in ourselves to make sure that we stay up to stay up and stay up to the task. Same with watching and reading something uplifting. Watch a good movie. Watch a travel show, unless that really makes you sad because you can't travel. But watch some stuff that you would normally find really uplifting to see. A good doco, a good movie, anything that gets your game up, you will feel better. Do some mindfulness meditation. When you're stressed, our thoughts tend to speed up and we start to, oh my gosh, about all that sort of stuff. 10 minutes a day. It doesn't take much more than that. 10 minutes a day to practice mindfulness through apps or whatever will help you to calm all that stuff down. Now, there's plenty of good apps out there. I'm really partial to one called Smiling Mind, Mind That Smiles, Smiling Mind. It's Australian, everything's free, but there's plenty of other good ones. Headspace have got one. There's one called One Giant Mind. There's an app called Calm. There's plenty of other ones. But to actually take time every day, about 10 minutes, more is better, but 10, 15 minutes minimum, to just calm down a little and listen to a mindfulness app and just go through one of those exercises. I can promise you, there's loads of research behind that will most likely have positive effects for your resilience and for your ability to deal with stuff. So that's on the what to do in general. Now, work is kind of the same thing. If you're going through tough times, uncertain times at work, either because of reorganizations or because of an uncertain future, or because all of a sudden have to work from home, or you and your colleagues have been split up because some can work from home and others can't, that can get tough. Acknowledge that. Feel the feeling. Acknowledge the fact that change is taking place. It is what it is. I know it sounds corny, but it's kind of true. Acknowledge that stuff and acknowledge the fact that makes you feel a particular way. It's okay to feel that way because it's true. That is based on a realistic situation. Facing your fears is a good one. Acknowledge, call them out. It's like, I feel really unsettled. That's something I've been feeling for the last 2 years. I've been feeling very unsettled. Now, I don't have to wallow in that, but when it comes up, I'll acknowledge it. And I'll tell my wife, it's like, I'm not feeling the best today. I'm a bit frustrated. I'm unsettled. It's like, I don't feel good. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with me. It's just that I'm now translating what my good old security guard brain is thinking about the current situation. I'm stepping away from it by just acknowledging my feeling. And not long after, I generally start to feel a little bit better because I've acknowledged that feeling rather than chewing on it. So confronting your feelings and seeking support, either from your supervisor or manager or employee assistance program, that's where Uprise comes in, could be a very good idea just to seek support. We are not the victim of circumstance. You can talk this through with people. So to do that and get the help is a good thing. Now, if you can, put a different perspective on that. Remember that thoughts are just thoughts. So we can also decide, that's a CEO task, we can decide to think another thought about something, and potentially that gives us a different perspective on that. Or if you can talk to an Uprise coach about something like that, so how could you think about this situation and brainstorm that? or do that with your supervisor or manager or HR, whoever is there to help you out. That can give you a different perspective on stuff, which then makes us feel better and more resilient. And change in general, we are in a rapidly changing world, folks. There's nothing we can do about that. Leaning in, I know it sounds simple, but leaning in to that change is often the better way than leaning back and resisting it, because the change is happening and you either come along willingly or you come along unwillingly, but you're coming along. So to lean into that change, to be flexible to new challenges, new tasks, and say, okay, how can I make this work? That would be the question. How can I make this work? That will be the way forward. That's way more well, not necessarily is way more effective, but could be way more effective than go like, oh my gosh, this is so much. What am I going to do with this now? And then freezing like a deer in the headlights. So in that sense, if you can be part of the change as well, if you know the change is taking place, potentially be proactive about it, and not only lean in, but make suggestions about how that change could be implemented properly and what your role could be in the workplace. Be an influencer. So you can help that change drive forward and it's ideally that will make you feel, that's another feeling, there's a chance that will make you feel more empowered rather than you just constantly coming along with the change that's happening. And that leads to communicate. Always talk. Don't hold things to yourself. Get them out, whether you talk them through with a coach within Uprise, with your personal mental health professional, with your supervisor, with your manager. Discuss stuff that weighs on your mind. Just the simple act of discussing things with people generally makes us feel better. Remember, we're a herd animal. We are meant to communicate because we do it all day long. The more you can communicate rather than having it going around this noggin, or even if you write it down or just talk through it with a best mate or with your partner or husband or wife, your spouse, talk it through. If you can talk it through, you're already processing. And then remember that there are times that we feel stressed. This time is not a good time. Tell you a very personal example. My daughter, 21 years old, has been living in the UK for the last 2 years. She went for a trip, never came back. She still enjoys it there. But we were supposed to see her twice in the last 2 years. Well, obviously that didn't happen. And yes, I can feel very frustrated and very sad about that because we haven't seen her. Thank gosh for good old modern technology. So we see her on FaceTime. But actually hugging her and just being with her and just stroking her hair and just putting an arm around and going, hey, how you doing, kiddo? I haven't been able to do that. No, that stinks. And sometimes that is just what it is. It stinks. And for me to acknowledge that, and for you in your personal life situation, potentially not being able to see family, being stuck at home, that's when you need to focus on the feelings that are accurate and what we can do about that, if anything. If we can't do anything about it, then it's a matter of acknowledging those feelings and just watching them until they drop away, which they generally always do. But the mindfulness meditation generally goes a long way. So picture that in, try and fit that into your life. And that becomes with the last one, the bigger picture. If you can ultimately get a feel for the fact that this is not going to be with us forever, that you don't have to have false hope, but it's okay to have hope. To say, well, this stinks, but I know I will see my daughter again one day in my particular personal circumstance, which I will. I'm convinced about that. Then that can carry, that can carry a bit of a load. That takes a little bit of the load off my shoulder. Same for you. Maybe you guys, I don't know if you're all working from home, but if you are working from home or are kind of disjointed because everyone's everywhere, there will be a day when things will get better. Whether they're going to be the same as before, not sure, but they will get better than they are now. And to lean into that thought and go like, yep, okay, there is a bigger picture going on. It's not all doom and gloom, even though it's pretty bad. That in itself can already help you. So those are, I said I was going to go fast and furious, but here's just a bunch of ideas you can take along and potentially listen to recording. I'm happy to keep talking about that offline as well, or to do that in a chat through Uprise. A couple of things you can take away. It's mainly working with our brain. Remember the neurobiology 101? It's not letting the security guard constantly drag us to creature comforts and burying ourselves in that, or trying to run away from what we think is dangerous or anxiety provoking. It's acknowledging that and then letting the two brain parts, the security guard and the CEO, work together on a more effective solution on what could be preferred. And that's resilience. So if you look in resilience in general, it's acknowledging our emotions, feeling one way, but still doing something else that's more effective in the long run, not necessarily the short run. And to always keep that in mind. Now, stop is a good one. This is one I'll give you. This is a first aid tool within counseling. I'm just looking at the clock. Yeah, we're going all right. Stop, it's an acronym. S stands for actually stop. If you find yourself fretting, ruminating, whatever it is that you're doing, stop. Call yourself, stop. Either say it out loud if you're by yourself, think it, stop. Interrupt that thought stream. So that's the S. The T in stop stands for take a really deep breath, preferably 3. 3 deep breaths, really deep ones. To actually center yourself and ground yourself again in the here and now, rather than wherever you were with your thoughts. The O in stop stands for observe. Become really observant of your present surroundings. Look around you, listen around you, smell around you, taste around you. Just become really present within your senses. Plant your feet on the floor and feel them. Become really present. And then P stands for proceed, but now in a way that's a little bit more effective than what we were just doing before. So if you sat behind your desk feeling all overwhelmed and stressed, then a P action, proceed action, could be get up, get a glass of water. Or if you're overwhelmed or everything that's going on in the world and you're feeling anxious, it could be get up, go outside, go for a walk. Or it could be talk to your mate. Or it could be play PlayStation 4 or 5 for a couple of minutes. Or it's read a book or put a bit of music on. But do something that interrupts that thought train that you were caught up in before. So that's a really good one to try out. And I'm aware of the time, so I won't keep you much longer. Breathing is a really important one. There's tons of scientific research in the psychology industry that says that breathing is a really good way to build our resilience, to keep ourselves centered. So a really good breathing technique is what they call resonant breathing. So whether you do a 4-second in breath, a 1-second hold, 4-second out, and then a second hold at the bottom and then up, so 4-1-4 or 5-1-5. 5 seconds seems to be even more aligned with our natural rhythm. So it's really slow in breath. Second hold, a really slow breath for 5 seconds, a hold at the bottom, and do that for about 10 cycles. So about 2.5, 3 minutes, something like that. Maybe 2 minutes. If you can sit like that, take some time in the morning, at night, where you just breathe that way. Breathe in a 4-4-1-4, 5-1-5 pattern, depending on how long you can do it, how slow you can breathe. The research is very optimistic about that being massively useful to just ground ourselves and calm the security guard brain down. And the only part of our brain that can actually engage this action and stay on task to focus on it is the CEO. So you're kind of sending the CEO brain to the mental health gym, if you will. You're strengthening its power. So breathing, massively important. Loads of breathing exercises on apps like Smiling Mind or Headspace or Calm or One Giant Mind. There's loads of them on there. Make them a preference. No matter what goes on in your life around you, if you can sit still for about 10 or 15 minutes and focus on your breath, there's a good chance that you'll start to feel better in the medium to long term. Maybe not right now, but in the medium to long term, your resilience level will grow massively, and that'll be of massive benefit for you in the longer term. So that is pretty much it, I reckon. Key takeaways. Remember that our brains lag behind our evolution as a species. Our brains are old in their makeup, and our lives have absolutely exponentially grown in our evolution. And our brains are just desperately trying to catch up. I joke with my clients that we have Windows 3.1 running the most updated Office software. It's clunky. It's just really clunky. And that's the same that goes on with us in our systems as well. Events become words. Remember that one. Whatever happens or whatever you think is happening gets translated into words and mental images. And those words and mental images seem to become reality. So even saying the word or seeing the picture in your head will evoke a response by your security guard brain. Now, those images or those words are not always the truth. So to diffuse them, to step above that and to look at it and to work with it, to diffuse your thoughts, thanks mind, or I'm having the thought that, or whichever, will help you to keep some distance from your thinking, which automatically will start to make you feel a little bit better. and proactive coping, in the strategies that we've talked about, can help you manage change and live in uncertainty, which we'll all do to a certain degree, and for some time yet. So that being said, I think I'll leave it here. I'll pass it over to Rain to close this off. If there's any questions, I'm quite happy to answer them here. But if you're all okay, then we'll leave it at this. We've got another 5 or 6 minutes left. So any questions from the audience? Nope. Everyone good? Sounds good to me. So I think you can close the recording shortly, Rain, and send it to your point of contact. And then if anything, people feel free to reach out to us at Uprise, where we're here to answer your questions. Rain can help with that through your point of contact, but make sure you keep looking after yourself. There's loads of good stuff that we can do. The challenge is to actually commit to that, because it often doesn't feel like we want to do that. But remember, that's your security guard brain talking, and it's not always the wisest mentor. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Mark, for facilitating this webinar. Is there any other questions from the attendees? None? All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. Thank you, Liani, for organizing this as well. And most of all, thank you so much, Mark, for facilitating this. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.